Imagine every word that escapes your lips is like a thread, skillfully woven into the intricate fabric of your personality. The way you express your thoughts is not merely an act of conveying information, but rather an open door into the labyrinth of your mind, a kaleidoscope of your emotions, an echo of your upbringing, and even into the dark corners of your subconscious beliefs. What if the veil were to be torn away, revealing the truth that the words you choose, the tone in which they are spoken, and the rhythm of your speech can tell more about you than you ever dared to imagine? Prepare for a fascinating dive into the depths of human communication, where every nuance matters and every statement is a key to understanding. By the end of this journey, you will not only grasp the mystery of why your speech has taken on precisely these forms, but also discover hidden facets of your own personality, the existence of which you may not have even suspected. And the final revelation, the most powerful and poignant of all, has the potential to forever change your perception of communication and its role in your life. Language is not just a tool for exchanging information. It is a living imprint of your mind, a unique signature of your experience, and a mirror reflection of your inner world. From the intricate constructions of sentences to the words you instinctively choose, every aspect of your speech is shaped by forces rooted in the depths of your psychology, your environment, and even your biological nature. Think about how captivating the speech of a person who conquers with their charm from the very first words can be. Perhaps their voice sounded soothing, instilling calmness, or their words radiated authority, evoking involuntary respect. Now compare this with the impression of speech that is rambling, timid, and uncertain. What is the difference? Is it only in the choice of words, or is there something more? The truth is that our manner of speaking is not accidental. It is formed under the influence of many factors: upbringing, social environment, cultural traditions, and even the peculiarities of how the brain processes information. Psychology has long studied the relationship between language and self-identity. Sigmund Freud, for example, argued that our speech patterns often expose subconscious desires and internal contradictions. Modern linguistic research has revealed that vocabulary and speech style can indicate various aspects of personality, from the level of confidence to emotional state. It is worth considering. Studies show that the frequent use of filler words, such as and like, does not always indicate the speaker's insecurity. In some cases, these words serve as a kind of cognitive tool, allowing a person to buy time to think about information. However, excessive use of such fillers may signal nervousness or a lack of confidence. In contrast, people who speak with deliberate pauses and a controlled pace often give the impression of being more confident and authoritative. The words we choose represent one of the most expressive aspects of our speech. Psycholinguistic studies shed light on how vocabulary can serve as a reflection of character traits. For example, people who tend to frequently use personal pronouns such as I and me generally have greater introspection and self-awareness. At the same time, those who prefer collective terms such as we and us often demonstrate more developed social connections and empathy. No less important is the aspect of formality or informality of speech. It is enough to pay attention to how our speech transforms depending on the interlocutor. In communication with a close friend, the tone becomes casual, abounding in colloquial expressions and slang. However, in conversation with superiors or in a professional environment, the language is transformed, becoming more structured, precise, and refined. This linguistic shift is not accidental, but rather an adaptive reaction formed under the influence of social conditioning and learned patterns of behavior. Language, as a powerful tool of communication, influences not only the perception of personality by others, but also self-perception. In psychology, there is a concept of linguistic relativity, which asserts that language shapes thought. In other words, familiar vocabulary can reinforce certain mental attitudes and beliefs. Regular use of negative statements such as "I can't do anything right" or "I'm constantly making mistakes" can fix these statements in the mind as an undeniable truth. However, a conscious commitment to positive and inspiring speech can form a stronger and more resilient way of thinking. It is worth considering how often a person pays attention to their speech. Does he or she notice patterns that may reveal his or her true self? Does he use words that express confidence, or does he show indecision? Does he speak clearly and distinctly, or is his speech full of doubts and uncertainty? In the future, we will explore deeper aspects of this fascinating topic. In the art of communication, there are subtle nuances that extend beyond spoken words and intonations, elements that reflect personal characteristics, social status, and even the level of emotional intelligence. Understanding these subtleties can radically change the perception of the communication process. Reflecting on a recent conversation, it is worth considering how conscious the manner of speech was. Often, attention is focused on the content of statements, overlooking the form of their expression. However, it is how we speak that often matters more than what. Take, for example, the tone of voice. Studies in the field of communication psychology have repeatedly confirmed that intonations convey more meaning than the words themselves. Albert Mehrabian, a renowned psychologist, argued that only 7% of information is perceived from words, while 38% comes from the tone of voice, and an impressive 55% from body language. This means that even the most carefully chosen vocabulary may not achieve its goal if the tone does not match the intention, and the message will be perceived differently than expected. Consider the simple phrase, "I'm okay." It seems that these three words do not hide anything complicated, but imagine how their perception changes depending on the intonation. A warm, reassuring tone inspires confidence, while a cold and detached one creates distance, and a sarcastic and disdainful shade completely reverses the meaning. That is why some people attract attention effortlessly, while others have to fight to be taken seriously. And it's not just about the content of the message, but also the art of its presentation. Let's delve into this issue even deeper. The rhythm and pace of speech play a defining role in how others perceive the speaker. Note how confident speakers deliberately slow down the pace, allowing each word to gain weight and significance. This is not an accident, but a conscious technique. In situations when we are overcome with excitement, we instinctively want to speed up our speech, as if trying to push the words out before the thoughts leave us. However, such haste can create the impression of anxiety and uncertainty. Conversely, a controlled, measured pace of speech signals confidence, authority, and composure. It is no secret that outstanding leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr. and Barack Obama are famous for their deliberate rhythm of speech. Their phrases are carefully selected, and pauses are placed with intent. This approach not only enhances the impact of their words, but also allows the audience to comprehend what they have heard. But what about everyday communication? What role does the pace of speech play in the interaction between people? Studies show that imitating someone else's manner of speech, whether it's speed, tone, or choice of words, can strengthen understanding and establish a closer connection. This phenomenon is known as linguistic mirroring, the subconscious adaptation of speech to the speech of the interlocutor. This mechanism of social survival helps create a sense of community and trust. Remember how often, when in the company of a person with a particular accent or manner of speaking, you begin to involuntarily adopt some of their speech features. This is not an accident. Our brain strives for social connections, and speech is one of the key tools for establishing them. That is why charismatic people know how to win people over. They intuitively adjust their speech to the audience, making their words more understandable and attractive. Let's turn our gaze to the lexicon, the treasure trove of words that we operate with in everyday life. This verbal arsenal serves as an unmistakable reflection of our origin, level of education, and even the most intimate traits of character. It is worth thinking about how bizarrely language transforms, flowing between different social groups like a river changing its course. The vocabulary used in the office often differs dramatically from the casual chatter in the circle of close friends or family. This phenomenon of linguistic flexibility, known as code switching, is an integral part of our lives, whether it is a conscious choice or a subconscious adaptation. As a vivid example, consider a person who, shining with formal Polish at a business meeting, switches in an instant to casual speech full of slang when meeting old friends. This ability to juggle linguistic styles is not just an ability to adapt to circumstances, it is a reflection of our multifaceted identity. Each version of our speech represents a unique aspect of ourself, like a facet of a precious stone. But there is an even more fascinating aspect to this question: the inextricable link between vocabulary and our cognitive abilities. Scientific studies convincingly demonstrate that people with a rich vocabulary exhibit more subtle and profound thinking. After all, words, like an artist's brushes, shape our perception of the world, painting it in bright or muted tones. This idea has its roots in the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, a bold theory that argues that language is not just a tool for expressing thought, but also directly influences the very process of thinking. In other words, the more extensive our vocabulary for describing and understanding experience, the more complex and multifaceted our understanding of that experience becomes. Consider, for example, the realm of human emotions. In the English language, the vocabulary for describing feelings is relatively small. Happy, sad, angry, upset. These are perhaps the main definitions. However, in other languages, there are lexical units that can convey the subtlest nuances of emotional states with amazing accuracy. The Japanese word tsundoku, for example, refers to the situation when a person buys books but never finds the time to read them. The Portuguese word saudade describes a deep, nostalgic longing for something that may never return. When a language provides a word to describe a particular life experience, it allows people to perceive that experience more concretely and tangibly. Expanding one's vocabulary is not just a way to impress others with one's erudition, it is an opportunity to expand the horizons of one's thinking. The words that a person uses regularly have a direct impact on their perception of reality. If limiting phrases such as "I can't," "it's impossible," or "I'm not good at it" prevail in speech, then a person, perhaps without realizing it, reinforces self-imposed limitations. It is worth considering, how often does each of us listen to our own speech? Have you ever stopped in the middle of a conversation and asked yourself, what does my speech say about me? Does it express confidence or, conversely, insecurity? Does it facilitate contact with the interlocutor or create distance between you? In the following narrative, we intend to explore an even deeper aspect: the hidden influence of culture, upbringing, and social conditioning on the ways we communicate. And the final discovery, the most powerful of all, can make you reconsider established ideas about communication. Are you ready to uncover the deep layers of your own voice and understand how it shapes your reality? From the moment of birth, a person's voice, their unique manner of speaking, is shaped by a number of invisible forces surrounding them. Family, cultural environment, social environment, and even the media they consume. All these elements contribute to the creation of a unique way of communication. However, the question arises, how much of this voice belongs to the person themselves, and how much is just a reflection, an echo of everything that they have absorbed over the years. Let's start with upbringing. Sociolinguistic studies convincingly demonstrate that a person's earliest speech patterns are closely related to how their caregivers communicated with them in childhood. If a child grew up in an atmosphere where the language was rich and expressive, then most likely their own vocabulary and ability to formulate thoughts developed at an accelerated pace. Conversely, if communication in childhood was more limited, where direct expression of feelings and thoughts was not encouraged, then a person could unwittingly adopt speech patterns that reflect hesitation or self-censorship. It is worth thinking about how children imitate the speech of their parents, copying not only words but also tone, rhythm, and even the emotional coloring behind certain phrases. If a child often hears phrases like "it's impossible" or "you always ruin everything," then they can transfer these verbal constructions into adulthood, subconsciously reinforcing limiting beliefs. On the other hand, a child raised in an environment filled with encouragement and support, where phrases like "you can understand it" or "there is always a way out" are often heard, can grow up speaking with greater confidence and optimism. However, in addition to family ties, there is another significant factor that influences the formation of our communication: culture, a complex and multifaceted phenomenon. Language, being an integral part of culture, is inextricably linked to it, and different cultures demonstrate unique approaches to organizing communication between people. In Western societies, for example, communication is often characterized by directness and an individualistic focus. Here, it is customary to openly express one's opinion, and assertiveness in conversation is often perceived as a sign of self-confidence. At the same time, many Eastern cultures favor a more indirect communication style, where the emphasis is on maintaining harmony and considering the social context. Silence can be as meaningful as spoken words, and what remains unsaid can be as important as what is voiced. It's worth considering whether a person tends to be direct and specific in their speech, or whether they prefer to soften their statements, carefully guiding the conversation to avoid potential disagreements. Such tendencies are not merely individual preferences, but rather cultural imprints deeply rooted in the consciousness through years of interaction with the surrounding world. Notably, even within a single country, speech patterns can vary significantly depending on the region, social class, or community. A person's speaking style undoubtedly bears the imprint of their life journey. Someone from an academic background accustomed to intellectual discussions and nuanced arguments will express themselves differently than someone who grew up in a working-class environment where directness, speed, and practicality in communication are valued. One style is not necessarily better than another, but each is a unique mirror reflecting a person's origins and experiences. The influence of social norms should not be forgotten. Society places certain demands on our speech based on factors such as gender, social status, and profession. For example, research shows that women, on average, are more likely to use so-called hedging language, softening phrases like "I think" or "maybe we should try," while men tend to make more assertive and categorical statements. This is more a reflection of cultural norms that have historically encouraged different communication styles for different genders than a biological difference. The way people adapt their speech, depending on their audience, is also revealing. This phenomenon demonstrates how much our communication is influenced by social factors and context. Skillful use of language is an important facet of social intelligence. A politician's oratory skills differ greatly from a casual conversation with close friends. A doctor uses medical jargon when communicating with colleagues but speaks in simple and understandable language when addressing a patient. This ability to switch codes, to juggle different speech styles undoubtedly indicates a developed social intelligence. However, a legitimate question arises: behind all these linguistic metamorphoses, does a genuine voice lie hidden? Modern technologies have a tremendous impact on language. In the digital age, the ways we communicate are undergoing rapid changes. Social networks, text messages, and voice-to-text technology not only influence the content of our speech, but also transform the very process of speaking. Have you noticed how the style of writing text messages differs from in-person communication? Short sentences, emojis replacing intonations, abbreviations expressing entire thoughts. These digital habits shape our speech in the real world as well, subtly affecting natural speech rhythms and expectations for communication. The modern generation is growing up in an era where asynchronous communication is becoming increasingly prevalent. Conversations are increasingly turning into a series of delayed, discrete exchanges, as opposed to live dialogue taking place in real time. This fundamental shift has a noticeable impact on the ability to concentrate, tolerance in communication, and even the mechanisms of processing oral speech. Perhaps many have noticed how their ability to remain engaged in prolonged conversations gradually weakens over time. This is not a coincidence, but rather a logical consequence of living in a world where instant responses and quick exchanges have become the norm. However, despite all these external influences, something remains constant: one's own voice. It is shaped by culture, family, society, and technological progress, but at its core lies a unique authenticity inherent only to a specific individual. And here arises the most important realization: choosing how to use one's voice can actively shape one's own future. It is worth considering how one's manner of speech affects success in life. The words one chooses, the confidence in one's tone, the structure of one's thoughts, all this can open or close doors. It is no coincidence that some people are able to attract everyone's attention by uttering only a few words, while others find it difficult to make an impression, regardless of the volume of what is said. It's not just about vocabulary or intelligence, but about the sincere intention behind the words. Becoming aware of your own manner of speaking opens doors to improving it, allowing you to move from automatic speech to purposeful communication. On the path to deep understanding, the potential for transformative change is revealed. Minor but thoughtful adjustments in speech can influence not only how others perceive you, but also your self-esteem. The question arises: are we ready to unlock the full potential of our voice? Speech is not merely a reflection of personality, but also a factor that shapes it. Speech is not a passive habit, but an active force capable of influencing self-confidence, relationships with others, and future success. The human brain perceives its own speech in the same way as it perceives the speech of others. Word choice, tone of voice, and the structure of thoughts all influence self-perception. Constantly belittling one's abilities, expressed in phrases like, "I'm not good at this," or "I'm not sure I can handle it," gradually becomes ingrained in the subconscious. Such verbal habits shape the perception of oneself, reinforcing the version of the personality that corresponds to the statements. However, the reverse is also true. By purposefully choosing language that inspires, exudes determination and confidence, a person gradually embodies the version of themselves that these words reflect. This is not just popular self-improvement rhetoric, but a scientifically substantiated fact, confirmed by psychological research. Self-perception theory, proposed by psychologist Daryl Bem, posits that people form a perception of themselves based on their own behavior. In other words, if a person speaks like a confident individual, their brain begins to accept this confidence as fact. It's worth recalling how influential historical figures used their speech not only to inspire the masses but also for personal transformation. Leaders, entrepreneurs, and visionaries realize that their manner of communication shapes the perception of others, and this perception, in turn, defines their reality. So how do you master this powerful tool? One of the most effective ways is conscious speech adjustment. That is, actively improving language patterns in accordance with the desired way of thinking. Below are 3 key changes in speech that can have a profound impact on how a person speaks and, consequently, how they live. To achieve confidence in communication, it is necessary to make adjustments to one's speaking style. Firstly, one should abandon uncertain turns of speech in favor of assertive statements. Often the use of softening phrases such as "I think," "maybe," or "I'm not sure," but undermines trust in the speaker, even if they possess deep knowledge in the area being discussed. Direct statements, on the other hand, demonstrate confidence and conviction. For example, instead of the tentative "I think this might work," one should confidently say, "This will work." Secondly, conscious control over the pace of speech is important. Rushing through a conversation can create the impression of nervousness and insecurity. Confident speakers, on the contrary, speak deliberately, allowing their words to impress listeners. A slow pace of speech allows the speaker to be perceived as thoughtful, knowledgeable, and in control of the situation. Thirdly, it is necessary to eradicate the habit of excessive self-criticism and self-deprecation. It is important to distinguish modesty from self-sabotage. Many people, striving for casualness, resort to humor or casual remarks that belittle their intelligence or abilities. For example, "I'm terrible at this," or "I have no idea what I'm doing." Such statements, seemingly harmless, create a negative internal attitude and reinforce self-doubt. Instead, one should rephrase their thoughts in a positive light. Instead of "I'm bad at this," you can say, "I'm learning this." Instead of "I have no idea," one should say, "I'm figuring this out." These small changes, all these transformations fundamentally change the way of thinking, focusing on development rather than self-limitation. And here is the final, but perhaps the most significant insight. The human voice is not just a way of exchanging information. It is a powerful tool for creating reality around oneself. Every spoken word is an affirmation of a certain version of oneself, one's inner self. In every conversation, a person either strengthens their self-confidence or subtly undermines its roots, opens new horizons of opportunity, or personally erects barriers, establishes strong connections with others, or creates emotional distance, alienating themselves from the world. Therefore, it is worth asking yourself an important question. What story does the speaker's speech tell? Is it a narrative of inner strength, clarity of thought, and purposefulness? Or is it a rambling story full of hesitation, uncertainty, and self-limitations? Everyone has the freedom to choose. Starting today, it is necessary to begin listening to yourself, carefully analyzing your own speech. Pay close attention to the words and expressions you use, the tone and intonation you choose, and the rhythm and timbre of your voice. Once you become aware of these nuances, you will unlock the potential for positive change. As your manner of speaking transforms, so will the perception of those around you, reshaping your mindset and ultimately changing your entire life. Now that the veil has been lifted and the truth about your speaking style has become clear, an important question arises. How do you intend to use this knowledge? How will you apply this newfound understanding to improve your communication and achieve your goals? Thank you for your attention to this topic.